What happens when the truth, raw, unfiltered, and long suppressed, erupts not in a protest or a court ruling, but live on national television? What happens when someone finally refuses to play by the rules of civility that were written to silence? Pain. In a world dulled by political spin and media fatigue, it wasn't a headline that cracked the lie wide open. It was a voice, steady, sharp, and impossible to ignore. That voice belonged to Jasmine Crockett. Senator Ted Cruz, ever the political showman, leaned slightly forward in his chair. His suit was immaculate, his tie carefully knotted, his smile rehearsed. With the eyes of the nation on him, he offered a statement not of ignorance, but of strategy. Police brutality isn't an epidemic, it's a political weapon. The words spilled out like oil on water, slick, calculated, and flammable. The moderator blinked. For a heartbeat, the studio fell into stunned silence. Somewhere, a producer in a control room dropped their pen. Cruz sat back, satisfied, unaware, or perhaps too aware, of the fuse he had lit. Millions watched, in living rooms, hospital lounges, classrooms, on cracked phones and HD screens. The sentence was a denial soaked in privilege, polished with the confidence of someone who had never been told to keep both hands visible during a traffic stop. And then Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. Not aggressively, not theatrically, but with the terrifying precision of someone who had waited long enough. "Tell that to Walter Scott's mother," she began, her voice as steady as a courtroom verdict. "Tell it to the children who flinch at sirens before they learn to multiply." She didn't list names for effect. She summoned them. Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Elijah McClain. Her voice didn't shake, it carved. Each name was a chisel, breaking through the myth of isolated incidents. "Bad. Apples," she said, eyes locked on Cruz. "The whole orchard's rotten when the barrel protects them." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded. It vibrated. It demanded acknowledgement. It wasn't just the studio that stilled. It was the nation. A moment suspended in collective realization. This wasn't a debate. It was an indictment. And it had only just begun. Jasmine Crockett didn't wake up that morning planning to make history. But history has a cruel way of finding those it's been avoiding. She stood in the green room before the show, smoothing her blazer with hands that had once drafted appeals for clients who never got their day in court. The producer's voice buzzed in the background, mic checks, camera angles, last-minute notes. But Jasmine's mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Tyrone Mayfield, about the way his voice had cracked when he told her he couldn't get a job because of a resisting arrest charge that came from sitting on his own front steps. She knew how the system worked. She had seen it chew through boys like Tyrone and spit them out as statistics. Her father had taught her early how to survive. Traffic stops. License out before the officer reaches the window. Keep your hands on the wheel. Never talk back, even when you're right. But survival wasn't justice. And justice, she'd come to learn, wasn't blind. It squinted hard at skin color and blinked past body cams. As she sat down across from Ted Cruz, she felt the familiar burn in her chest, the one that came every time she had to explain why just comply wasn't a solution, why both sides wasn't neutrality, but complicity. She could have let it slide, could have smiled politely and played the game like so many others. But what would that teach the girl who sent her that trembling video whispering, "I want to be like you"? That silence was strength? That dignity meant swallowing truth? No, not today. So when Cruz dropped his line, his polished soundbite, designed to spark outrage and deflect accountability, Jasmine didn't flinch. She stepped into the fire. And as she spoke, something inside her shifted, not because she was angry, but because she was ready. Ready to stop absorbing the weight of other people's lies. Ready to push back. And as the audience leaned forward, as the internet began to buzz with her name, Jasmine wasn't thinking about fame or legacy. She was thinking about Tyrone, about her father's trembling hand on the steering wheel, about the names etched into her memory like gravestones. She didn't come to play, she came to testify. The clip didn't just go viral, it detonated. It wasn't a political moment, it was a cultural reckoning. Jasmine's words looped endlessly on every screen, every feed. Barbershops in Baltimore, classrooms in Oakland, cafes in Brooklyn, everyone was watching her. Some nodded, some wept, and some clenched their jaws in discomfort. Because truth doesn't just land, it wounds. By the time Jasmine stepped out of her office the next morning, her world had shifted. Protesters were outside the Capitol, not chanting her name, but demanding justice, carrying signs with the names she'd said aloud: Tamir, Sandra, Elijah. Inside, the energy had changed too. She could feel it in the way her colleagues stared just a second too long, whispered when she passed, or smiled with their teeth but not their eyes. She had broken ranks, not with lies, but with honesty. And, in politics, that was more dangerous. The media played its predictable hand. Conservative outlets labeled her unhinged, unpatriotic, even a threat to unity. One headline read, "Crockett's Crusade, Truth or Tyranny." Late-night shows joked about her righteous rage, even supposedly progressive. Pundits offered backhanded praise. She's passionate, but we need solutions, not speeches. Jasmine read it all, not because she cared what they thought, but because she needed to know what she was up against. At home, the silence was louder than any applause. Her mother, usually proud and vocal, was quiet that evening. She sipped her tea, eyes glued to the news, worry etched deep into her brow. "They're gonna come for you, baby," she finally said. Jasmine nodded. She already felt it. The way her team hesitated before meetings, how invitations to panels disappeared overnight. The machine was recalibrating to swallow her whole or shut her down. But then came the counterweight. Thousands of messages, real ones. Letters from single moms raising black sons who sleep in hoodies and walk with fear. Videos from young girls saying, "I want to be fearless like you." A janitor from Milwaukee wrote, "You gave voice to the pain I clean off school floors every morning." Those words wrapped around Jasmine like armor. The system could throw shade, but the people were shining light. In the days that followed, she doubled down, introduced new legislation on police accountability, met with victims' families, refused to let the media reframe her passion as rage.
But each step forward brought more resistance. Some colleagues tried to sideline her in committees. Lobbyists pulled funding from allies who stood by her. Jasmine wasn't surprised. This was how systems defend themselves, not with logic, but with quiet sabotage. And yet,
she didn't flinch, because she knew, deep in her chest, that this fight was older than her, bigger than her, and worth every bruise. She wasn't just answering to voters or donors anymore. She was answering to history. And history, she knew, had no patience for cowards. The days turned into weeks, and Jasmine Crockett's name never left the headlines. But the applause had faded. Now came the whispers, the backroom deals, the cold shoulders in Capitol hallways. No one needed to say it aloud. She had crossed a line, not by lying, but by telling too much truth. Meetings were cancelled without warning. Scheduled interviews were rescheduled indefinitely. Staff members who once praised her boldness now avoided her gaze. Even some of her allies on the left advised her to tone it down, saying, "Don't give them ammo, Jasmine. We need you in the room." But Jasmine wasn't interested in just being in the room. She wanted to change what the room stood, for behind closed doors, she received threats, both veiled and explicit. A donor warned her campaign funding might dry up. A senior colleague offered her a choice committee seat if she stayed on message. The message, of course, meant silence, obedience, politics as usual. But Jasmine had already scorched that bridge in front of millions, and yet she felt the weight. At night, she sat alone on her couch, phone dimmed, TV off, letting the silence press in. The cost of defiance was real. Loneliness, vulnerability, fatigue. Sometimes she wondered if she'd made a mistake, if maybe, just maybe, staying quiet would have allowed her to do more from the inside. But then she'd remember the faces, the names, the unfinished funerals, the families still waiting on justice. One night, she received a letter, not an email, but a handwritten letter from a teenage girl in Missouri. It read, "Dear Ms. Crockett, my brother was shot last year. They said it was a mistake, but you spoke for him when no one else would. My mom cried when she saw you. She said you reminded her of Harriet. Please don't stop. We need your voice, even if it costs you." Jasmine clutched the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. It wasn't just her voice at stake anymore. It was the voices of every silenced mother, every afraid brother, every angry daughter. This wasn't just politics. It was preservation, survival. A war for truth in a system built on silence. So she stood back up. She returned to the Capitol not as a woman looking to survive, but as a storm prepared to shake every pillar. If they wanted quiet, they picked the wrong woman to silence. It started with a whisper. "There's an ethics complaint." Jasmine barely reacted. In Washington, such tactics were as common as coffee. But when her chief of staff placed the folder on her desk, she paused. The complaint wasn't vague or fabricated. It was orchestrated. Weaponized bureaucracy, dressed in legal language and false concern. The accusation, misuse of campaign funds. The source, anonymous. The timing, too perfect to be coincidence. She flipped through the pages, slowly, her eyes narrowing. Every detail had been twisted. Her donations to bail funds reframed as radical political activity. A speaking engagement at a youth center painted as a conflict of interest. They weren't coming after her for a mistake. They were manufacturing a scandal. Not to imprison her, but to discredit her. To make the public ask, is she who we thought she was? That night, she sat alone in her office, the lights dimmed, a photo of Tyrone Mayfield on her desk catching the faint glow of her laptop. She remembered something her father once told her. The system doesn't fear the loud ones. It fears the ones who refuse to play its game. That's what this was. Not fear of her rage, but of her clarity, of her refusal to compromise. They wanted to stain her integrity, not silence her words. Because if the public believed she was corrupt, her truth would no longer matter. But Jasmine wasn't the only one watching. The same journalists who once hesitated to cover her story now smelled something rotten. Independent outlets started asking questions. Why now? Where's the proof? A leaked memo from a Senate aide revealed internal pressure to neutralize Crockett before midterms. The narrative was shifting again, but not in the direction her enemies had hoped. Then came the public. Letters poured in. 1,000 signatures in one day, demanding the ethics board drop the investigation. Local activists flooded the Capitol steps. "We see you, Jasmine," their signs read. "And we see them too." And amidst the chaos, Crockett stood in front of the press, calm, direct. She looked into every lens and said, "This is what happens when you speak uncomfortable truths. They don't debate you. They try to erase you. But I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere." The fire hadn't dimmed. It had evolved. Now it wasn't just about brutality or broken systems. It was about survival in the face of institutional revenge. Jasmine realized she was no longer just a voice. She was a symbol. And symbols don't bend. They burn. The first time Jasmine saw the mural, she stopped mid-stride. On the cracked wall of an old corner store in St. Louis, her face stared back, painted, in bold reds and blacks, eyes fierce and mouth open mid-sentence. Below it, in dripping letters, "Truth needs no permission." She didn't know who painted it. No one did. But by the end of the week, similar images started appearing across the country, from alleyways in Chicago to abandoned train stations in Baltimore. Jasmine Crockett had become more than a congresswoman. She was a spark. What began as outrage evolved into a movement. Town halls that were once half empty now overflowed with teachers, nurses, teenagers, ex-officers, and grieving parents. They weren't looking for policy points. They wanted someone to feel what they'd carried for years. Jasmine didn't promise quick change. She promised to keep naming the pain. And that, more than any promise, was what people craved: acknowledgement. Visibility. But movements come with weight. Every word she spoke now echoed louder. Every silence was scrutinized. When she missed her nephew's birthday because of a protest in Minneapolis, her sister's text stung. "You're fighting for everyone's kids, just not ours." It cut deeper than any headline. Jasmine was losing pieces of her personal life, but how could she stop now? The fire she'd lit was no longer hers to contain. Then came the vigil for Elijah McClain. Hundreds stood in the cold, with violins in hand, playing in unison, soft, aching melodies that wrapped around the night like a shroud. Jasmine stood among them, not speaking, just listening. An elderly woman beside her, clutching a candle, whispered, "You gave us our voices back." Jasmine didn't reply. She couldn't. Her throat had tightened. For all the speeches, the hearings, the battles, this moment, raw and unfiltered, reminded her why she began. Yet not everyone celebrated. Pundits accused her of inciting division. Anonymous threats became routine. Her office windows were smashed one night, the word "liar" sprayed across the entrance. But even as fear circled like vultures, Jasmine found solace in the letters pinned to her wall. One, from a 10-year-old girl in Houston, simply read, "I'm not scared of the police anymore because you're brave, so I can be brave too." Jasmine kept that one in her wallet. Because courage, she knew now, wasn't the absence of fear. It was what you chose to do with it. The meeting room was colder than usual. Jasmine could feel the chill through her blazer as she stared across the polished mahogany table. Around her sat state officials, policy analysts, even hesitant allies from across the aisle. This wasn't a protest. It wasn't a speech. This was policy, and policy was slow, messy, and full of compromise. A police reform bill lay in front of her, riddled with edits, diluted clauses, and bureaucratic smog. They had kept her name on it, but not her words. The clause banning no knock warrants was now a recommendation. The mandate for body cams had loopholes the size of counties. Jasmine clenched her fist under the table. Was this how real change died? Not with violence, but with paperwork? Still, she spoke. Calm, steady, razor sharp. "This bill doesn't honor the people we lost. It insults them." A silence followed. One of the older officials leaned forward. "We need something that can pass, Congresswoman." She shot back without blinking. "Then pass something worth our pain." Outside, thousands waited. Some had camped for hours, wrapped in blankets and holding signs lit by street lamps. They believed in her, in what she could do. But Jasmine, sitting at the heart of government machinery, began to feel the unbearable truth. Being a symbol was easier than being a solution. She left the room, feeling heavy. When she stepped outside, cheers erupted, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. A young man handed her a single sunflower. "You gave us a reason to stand again," he said. She thanked him, her voice hollow. That night, back in her hotel room, Jasmine didn't sleep. She read every message in her inbox, every voicemail from her mother, every hate comment on her social media. She let it all soak in. She wanted to feel it, every inch of it. Because how could she lead people through pain if she numbed herself to it? At 4 a.m., she wrote her own version of the bill, unfiltered, unapologetic, and emailed it to every member of the committee. The subject line was simple. "This is what justice sounds like." It wouldn't pass as it was, not yet. But the fight was no longer about what they allowed. It was about what she demanded, and she wasn't afraid to stand alone anymore. Jasmine stood at the podium, her hands steady, but her heart racing. The lights were blinding, and the cameras captured every inch of her. This was it, the final moment where all the pressure of the past months would come crashing down. The bill had passed through the committee, but now it was facing the full Senate. Everyone was watching. Behind her, the walls were lined with supporters, mothers, activists, survivors of police violence. They had come to witness history, but Jasmine felt the weight of their hopes, their fears. She couldn't let them down. Not now. Not when the stakes had grown so high. She cleared her throat and spoke, her voice piercing through the nervous silence. In the chamber. "We stand at a crossroads," she began, each word deliberate, every pause heavy with meaning. A crossroads between continuing the cycle of injustice or finally taking responsibility. For too long, we've been told that the only solution is more surveillance, more control, more punishment. But what if I told you that real justice lies in recognizing the value of every life, every community, and every voice? Her gaze shifted from one senator to the next, her eyes unwavering. It was as if she was looking straight into the soul of each one, daring them to make the right choice. For a moment, the room was still. Then, the opposition rose. Senator Cruz, the same man who had dismissed the very concept of police brutality months ago, stood to counter her. His words were smooth, rehearsed, and dangerously calm. "We cannot simply throw out the rule of law for the sake of political correctness," he began. "Our police officers risk their lives every day to keep us safe. We cannot afford to tie their hands with unrealistic reforms." Jasmine's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She had prepared for this. She had been here before, on the streets, in the courts, in the debates, and she knew what had to be said. "Senator Cruz," she said, her voice a mix of steel and sorrow. "The rule of law you speak of is nothing but a shield for the system that protects the perpetrators while condemning the victims. This is not about political correctness. It's about human decency. It's about stopping the cycle of pain before it claims another child, another mother, another father. And if you can't see that, then you've already chosen your side." There was an audible gasp from the room. The tension was palpable. Jasmine's words had struck a chord, echoing through the chamber, reverberating in the hearts of those who had been waiting for someone to say it. But the battle was far from over. The debate raged on for hours, back and forth, each senator weighing the pros and cons, the pressure mounting with every passing minute. Jasmine fought tirelessly, not just with facts and figures, but with the raw truth of her lived experience. She wasn't just fighting for votes, she was fighting for lives. When the final vote came, Jasmine knew it wasn't a victory yet, not for her, not for the system, but for the people who had trusted her to carry their pain, their hopes, and their dreams of a better tomorrow. And as the Senate voted, a wave of realization hit Jasmine. This fight would never end. Even if this bill passed, even if it changed. The laws, the battle for justice was ongoing. The system was far from fixed, but it had cracked open just a little. As she walked out of the chamber, her supporters surrounded her, clapping, shouting her name. But Jasmine's mind was elsewhere. She thought of the mothers, the fathers, the children who would never see justice unless she kept going. She thought of her own childhood, of her own mother's teachings about standing up, even when the world tried to push you down. She would keep going, because she had no choice.